So in a sense then, this could be described as the pattern or the structure of the regulation of your self-worth, or the fluctuation of your self-worth, because it's information dependent. If, for example, you receive information that's very negative, that moves you far from your ideal, you will get emotions and thoughts as a result, and this will allow for, and this can cycle you, particularly because in these circumstances, if it's negative thoughts and negative emotions, the way in which you will act will drag upon the past in which you've also had negative thoughts and negative emotions, and hence you can cycle in this manner, which is something that needs to be considered considerably, if that is a good phrase to use, with regards to trying to solve problems by way of thinking them out, thinking out of the problem. Let's try and think our way out of that problem. That can have issues in that you lead to a world in which you stay in a negative state as you use the long-term memory that is related to the problem. But generally, the regulation of self-worth can occur by way of this mindfulness, and the reason as to how that can happen is because these thoughts, whatever they are, they need to be given a sense of meaning before they then allow for them to be back into this system. And for example, if the thoughts are negative, once they've given meaning that they are negative, that's when they can further drop the self-worth and produce, again, negative emotions that then will have to be thought about in order to reduce them. Now, that's perhaps a very elaborate way to say something perhaps more simple, which is that thinking patterns and thinking habits or change of thoughts that can happen, which you can notice if you are focusing on something, can be described as simply sounds in your mind, of course. And in this sense, you do not have to give them meaning. It is once these sounds have been given meaning that they become things that influence your self-worth. And I'll say that one more time, perhaps I'd say, once you focus on something and you notice an automatic thought, you need to be aware perhaps that they are sounds in your mind, and it is the fact that they are given meaning that allows for them to become the type of knowledge that influences your self-worth, either positively or negatively. It could be information that gives you a boost in your self-worth towards your eye, as you notice that you have information that suggests that you're moving towards your ideal self, or it can be negative in that it gives you information that moves away from the ideal self. Now, in this sense, however, if you can be non-judgmental, which is why the phrase non-judgmental metacognition is the background, or is the major phrase used for this conversation. If you can be non-judgmental, then that is perhaps when they stay sounds in your mind, of course. It is the fact that you give these sounds judgment, these automatic thoughts judgment, that then gives them the meaning, which then allows for them to influence your self-worth, or at least it allows for them to influence your idea about who you are in the present, who you have been in the past, what your future is. Now, in these circumstances, therefore, the non-judgmental part of it is particularly advantageous with regards to developing, in the sense that these automatic thoughts have two things that can happen to them if you are non-judgmental. You can break the link to meaning, and you can break the chain to judgments. So, in this sense, when you are thinking, it's perhaps not going to be a one-word thought. It will be a chain of thoughts, and it is the chain of thoughts, or a chain of words, sorry. It's not going to be a one-word thought. It will be a chain of words, and in this chain, when there are 4, 5, 6 words, some commas, and so on and so forth, some full stops, some spaces between them, then that sentence produces meaning. So if, for example, you notice your mind wandering and a sentence is being constructed, and you, as a result, go back to the breath or go back to what you're concentrating on, that is when we can say that you break the break the link to the meaning and break the chain to judgments. In other words, when there are multiple words as part of a sentence, and you cut off in the middle of that sentence to go back to the breath, then the meaning is much harder to fathom, and the meaning is much harder to obtain, which therefore reduces the capacity for it to influence your self-worth. Additionally, that could be described as breaking the link to the meaning, but it also is breaking the chain, because if you have multiple sentences and therefore you fall down the habit, for which many people do, habit of thinking, wherein one sentence leads to another sentence, which leads to another sentence, which perhaps you have practiced in terms of a habit, in terms of the phrase, it has become a habit to practice the chain of thoughts. Then breaking that chain occurs as a result of going back to the breath or going back to what you're focusing upon. So there are two mechanisms here that can occur with the automatic thoughts. One, when you go back to the breath, you break the chain. Two, you can break it within the sentence in terms of the words itself. But most importantly, this is the main part I would suggest is the most important, is that once you have caught yourself thinking, are non-judgmental generally. That is to say, you do not suggest that the thoughts, the chains of thoughts, or the sentences are positive or negative. They just are. Like rain just falls without it being a positive or negative thing. If you wished to make that judgment, you can suggest and you can get used to the thoughts themselves not then being followed by a judgment, and that in itself breaks this part here, in that it reduces the capacity for it to have meaning, and thus it does not again influence your self-worth. So the idea, to conclude, the idea of being able to go back to what you're concentrating on because you've lost focus can break the chain of judgments. It can break the link to meaning, because the meaning comes from perhaps the words constructing sentences and the sentences constructing paragraphs. But moreover, the idea of being non-judgmental, once you have noticed even the words or the sentences or the paragraphs, in and of itself can break the idea of it having meaning, because you yourself do not give it meaning unless you have decided on the judgment of it. Is it a positive or negative thought? Answering that question is a judgment, and it is that judgment that can be part of the idea of giving it meaning, which does not need to happen.